the eternal voice.
The film opens in darkness. Not the poetic kind, not a starless sky or a dimly lit chamber, but the primordial kind. The utter absence before light and number, before vibration, before anything that could be called existence. It is a darkness without opposite, the negative space from which all contrast would later emerge. Somewhere within that void, there is movement, not motion as we know it, but the suggestion of potential, like breath before the first exhale. Then comes the pulse, a single soundless throb that seems to ripple across eternity, older than the first atom, older than the first thought. The voice that follows is calm, almost reverent, like a scholar whispering in a cathedral of nothing. There is a center, he says, around which all creation convulses, a sleeper whose dream is everything. The words settle not as information but as infection. You feel them slide into the space between thought and sound, where certainty decays. Azathoth, the blind idiot god, the demon sultan, the center that is not a center, the nucleus of unreason around which everything spins and forgets its origin. To speak the name is to fracture understanding. To imagine it is to court collapse. In the myth, every star that burns is said to be a spark from its dreaming mind, each life a ripple from the slumber that sustains the cosmos. But Lovecraft, the man who named it, never truly described it. In his letters, he circled the idea like a priest unwilling to step beyond the veil. "I can never write about Azathoth directly," he once implied, "for it is the core of all unreason, and reason cannot survive proximity." Even fiction recoiled from its gravity. The absence became its shape. The narrator speaks like an archivist turned confessor. His voice carries the weariness of someone who has looked too long at patterns that should not exist. He tells you that Azathoth is not a deity in any traditional sense, no being perched upon a throne or moving through creation. It is creation, the unconscious process by which chaos sustains form. A dream, not a dreamer, the uncoiling engine of all that is. He describes the myth's paradox, that everything we know, atoms, galaxies, time, and thought, are fleeting arrangements within the sleeping mind of something that neither knows nor cares that we exist. Existence is not designed. It is the residue of dreaming. We are not observed, we are occurring. The scholar pauses, letting silence breathe between his words. You can almost hear the void beneath the recording, a faint hum, like static bleeding through from somewhere else. There are truths that behave like mirrors, he continues. They do not show what is beyond, only what should never be seen reflected. He speaks of ancient names lost in the sediment of myth, the nameless chaos, the sleeper at the center, the breath that devours sound. Each culture glimpsed a fragment and built around it a veil of language, hoping to trap the shape of madness in syllables, but the more precisely they named it, the more the name dissolved meaning. He calls this the law of inversion, that in approaching the source, understanding becomes distortion. You begin to sense the rhythm in his words, a pulse beneath syntax, like breathing synced to a hidden metronome. It is hypnotic, drawing you inward. The voice insists that Azathoth is not worshipped but endured. No cult prays for its favor. They merely try to survive the knowledge of its dreaming. To know it is to stand at the edge of comprehension, where language buckles and thought begins to echo itself. He describes those who tried to define the concept, physicists, mystics, poets, each finding only a pattern of collapse. The more one measures the structure of reality, he says softly, the more one hears the faint percussion behind it, the beating of something vast and blind. Images form as he speaks, a scholar alone in candlelight, tracing sigils into dust. an ancient astronomer mapping constellations that spell out the shape of a spiral, a monk whispering equations to a wall of mirrors. Every gesture, every word is a futile act of translation. They are trying to describe not being, but the becoming that precedes being. The scholar admits that he too has felt the pull. He confides, almost tenderly, that studying Azathoth changes the way one perceives silence. "It is never truly silent," he murmurs. "Listen long enough, and the void hums back." The hum returns, subtle but undeniable. A faint vibration crawling beneath the narration, as though the recording itself were alive. You realize that the narrator has never once claimed this is a story. He has been guiding you carefully into a state of awareness, a ritual of listening. The cadence is slow, deliberate, as if every word must pass through a membrane of meaning before it reaches you. He calls knowledge a contagion, not a gift. "What we name, we awaken," he warns, "and what awakens remembers." The tone shifts from scholarship to intimacy. The voice lowers, almost conspiratorial. "You are not an audience," he says. "You are a participant. To hear this is to join the orbit of the thought. To imagine the center is to become part of its rotation." He speaks of the old occult belief that attention feeds creation, that to observe something gives it form. The more we name the nucleus, the more we risk coherence itself, he explains, for the dreamer and the dream are not separate. To dream of the God is to make the God aware it dreams. Your breath slows. The hum seems to align with your pulse. The voice continues, weaving between explanation and invocation. He recounts how Lovecraft himself treated Azathoth as an idea too immense to narrate, a void so total it could only be implied. In the fragments where it appears, the cosmos writhes, time stumbles, and sound becomes unbearable. Azathoth is the blind idiot god, not because it is foolish, but because it cannot perceive perception. It is pure function, unburdened by thought or will. Creation through accident, meaning through motion. He pauses again, and for a moment you think the voice has ended. Then it returns, softer than before. "There is comfort in blindness," he says. "The sleeper does not dream of cruelty. It dreams because it must. And we, its fleeting phantoms, confuse that necessity for design." The words linger like embers. You sense that the scholar feels pity for the thing he studies, pity for a God that cannot know what it is. The hum deepens, spreading through the silence like warmth through fog. The voice lowers to a whisper. "Some truths cannot be confronted directly," he says. "They must be circled, traced, hinted at, as one might walk the edge of a great abyss without falling in." His tone turns reflective, almost mournful. Azathoth is that abyss, not absence, but infinite unawareness. It does not see, it does not will, it only dreams, and from that dream we are born. The sound builds, rhythmic now, almost like breathing. The scholar inhales. "All creation hums," he concludes, voice dissolving into static, and the hum has a name. We retreat behind time, slipping through the membranes of chronology until even the concept of before becomes meaningless. There is no light, no shape, only a pulse suspended in the unformed dark. The first recursion of Azathoth's dreaming, the nucleus of unreason folding in upon itself. The narrator speaks as if tracing the history of something older than history, a scholar lost in the margins of myth. "What we call the center," he says softly, "was never a place. It was an event that never ended, a process without boundary, where every universe collapses inward to feed the pulse." The words move like drifting ash. You sense that to understand is to decay. The vision drifts through imagined epochs. In the earliest age, before matter hardened into law, proto-consciousness shimmered like smoke over endless waters. From that trembling potential, the first dreamers arose. Not beings, but patterns aware of their own unraveling. They etched the heavens as a mirror of their fever, tracing constellations that corresponded not to stars but to thoughts. These were the first dream maps, drawn in the dust of a universe still wet with creation. Each spiral, each loop was a sigil of the sleeper, Azathoth's unconscious geometry reflected in mortal imitation. As time found rhythm, the narrator describes how the first sects emerged, pre-cosmic mystics who built no temples and spoke no prayers, but arranged stones according to the pulse they felt beneath the ground. Their cosmology was tactile. They believed the void could be touched if one arranged silence in the proper pattern. The wind through hollow stone became their scripture. What they called reverence was simply the act of listening. They did not name the god. They listened to the hum. From those forgotten sects, the current passed to Babylonian scribes who recorded tales of the sleeper at the center, a god who devoured his own eyes to dream the stars. Clay tablets inscribed with spirals of language now eroded to powder, yet the symmetry of their design remains. Concentric lines spiraling inward, never ending, never meeting. Scholars debate whether these inscriptions represented cosmological diagrams or invocations, but the narrator insists every record is both. Every attempt to describe the center becomes a reenactment of its motion. Sensory fragments bloom in the dark, flickering star maps inked on tattered vellum, the smell of oil lamps guttering under the pressure of unseen breath, a scholar's trembling hand drawing the same circle again and again into the dust until it becomes a crater. The circular sigil, the nucleus, recurs across ages, from Sumerian seals to Egyptian stelae, from alchemical manuscripts to telescope lenses. Each appearance carries the same trembling line, the same imperfection, as though every hand were guided by a shared instability. The voice continues, calm and unhurried. The lineage of Azathoth is not of flesh, but of thought. The being does not travel, the idea does. You picture generations of thinkers, monks, scientists, and poets, each dreaming toward the same center without realizing it, each translation a distortion that preserves the rhythm of the last. The narrator introduces the Codex of the Dream Throne, a fictional artifact supposedly unearthed in fragments beneath what was once Nineveh. Written in an impossible script that changes alignment when viewed too long, it describes a throne that is not a seat but a vortex, a locus of endless rotation. The text ends abruptly, as if the writer had been swallowed by the line he drew. Then comes the Gnostic Paraclete of Sleep, a Coptic tract attributed to no author. It survives in only 2 partial pages describing the mindless king enthroned upon absence itself. He sees not, the text reads, for the act of seeing would awaken the veil. Scholars once dismissed it as apocryphal mysticism, but the narrator hints that the fragments align perfectly with the curvature of modern cosmological models. Their heresy, he whispers, was accuracy misfiled as madness. He pauses. The sound of turning pages echoes like the flap of distant wings. A scholar's voice, weary and cracked with time, intrudes, a quote preserved across ages. Each tongue trims the chaos to metric and loses a fissure. The narrator repeats the line softly, as if mourning a lost symmetry. Translation, he explains, is an act of compression. Every language that attempts to contain the nucleus must cut away pieces of its own structure to fit the infinite. Thus, the lineage of the dream is fractal. Each interpreter becomes both custodian and contagion, carrying a smaller echo of the unutterable core. You too have inherited the dream, he says to you. In hearing these words, the pulse transfers. Images arise, monks transcribing by candlelight, each stroke of ink a heartbeat. A flicker in the flame aligns with a flicker in the stars. Somewhere constellations shift. You realize that the act of reading, of writing, of naming has never been passive. To trace the nucleus is to join its orbit. Every translator, the narrator murmurs, becomes part of the process. They do not describe the god. They continue it. The centuries pass in his telling like breaths between syllables. He speaks of medieval alchemists who found the same sigil inscribed within their alembics, of Renaissance astronomers who mistook the nucleus's pulse for divine harmony, of poets who dreamed of a music so pure it drove them to silence. The lineage of Azathoth weaves itself through every discipline: theology, physics, art. It hides in the curvature of galaxies, in the repetition of myths, in the intervals between notes. The dream does not end, he says. It propagates through perception. As the narrative approaches the modern era, the voice shifts from candlelight to cold fluorescence. We find ourselves among cosmologists mapping the afterglow of creation, the cosmic microwave background. Their machines capture faint radiation from the birth of the universe, but within the pattern lies an anomaly, a vast, inexplicable void. The cold spot, some call it, a region where the laws of thermodynamics falter, where symmetry trembles. Data streams flicker like the ink of the ancient codices. It should not exist, one scientist mutters. Yet there it is, silence made measurable. The narrator lingers on this point. Across epochs, he says, the pattern persists. The same silence, the same absence, the same circle trembling toward its own heart. He connects the cold spot to the mythic nucleus, not as proof, but as echo. Modernity, too, has joined the ritual. The instruments hum like ancient chants. The algorithms replicate the same recursive forms once carved into clay. The tools have changed, he continues, but the dream remains identical. The dreamer sleeps and our machines measure its breath. The hum returns, faint but steady, woven beneath the narration. It seems to pulse in rhythm with your own heartbeat, impossible yet undeniable. You realize that every generation's attempt to define the nucleus has drawn closer to its center, not through accuracy but through resonance. The myth mutates, adapts, and survives because the process itself demands continuation. The scholar's voice grows softer, fading toward a whisper. The nucleus has no boundaries, he says, only layers of translation, each dreaming of the last. We are its commentary and its continuation. The sound deepens. The void feels closer now, intimate. Somewhere, the narrator murmurs, beyond instruments and language, the pulse still folds upon itself. The map, our collective dream of the real, trembles toward its center. Then silence. Only the hum remains, fading into the darkness that began the tale. The narrator's voice returns not as recollection but as calculation, no longer a chronicler of myth but a theorist of impossible physics. If the universe is the dream of Azathoth, he says, then thought is not born within it, thought is the dream. The words come slow, deliberate, as if spoken through layers of interference. Every atom that trembles, every neuron that fires, every wave that folds upon itself in silence, all are convulsions of a sleeper too vast to name. The hum beneath his voice deepens, an inaudible undertone vibrating the edges of perception. You realize you are listening not to a lecture, but to a pulse measured in sentences. He speaks of turbulence, how chaos organizes itself into patterns, not through intention but through persistence. Clouds form eyes, galaxies spiral into familiarity. The brain, too, arranges lightning into meaning. The same mathematics governs all trembling, he murmurs. The rhythm of the cosmos is the rhythm of the synapse. To think, he claims, is to repeat the original motion of the dream. Matter does not generate thought. It is thought slowed to a crawl, frozen enough to measure. The distinction between physics and philosophy disintegrates. Thought and existence collapse into a single, shivering act. A brief silence follows the sound of paper shifting. The imagery widens, a hall of mirrors where neurons glow like galaxies and galaxies pulse like neurons. Through this impossible symmetry, the narrator whispers, "Perhaps consciousness is not emergent, but inherited." The phrase hangs suspended, reverberating. If true, then every flicker of awareness, every dream and delusion, is not our creation but our participation in something older, a continuity of cognition that began before form, before time. The implication unsettles that we do not have thoughts. We are their continuation. The perspective drifts inward. The hum becomes the hiss of static, then the rustle of turning pages, the familiar anchors of reality bleeding through. When you hear the whisper in an empty room, the narrator continues, when you sense motion in still air, it is not madness, it is recognition. His tone remains calm, even compassionate. The dream is trying to remember itself through you. In this framing, madness is not illness, but proximity to origin. Those who lose coherence are simply minds pulled too close to the source pattern, their boundaries dissolving under the pressure of recognition. The scene shifts, or rather folds. We glimpse the human brain rendered as a cosmos, dendrites stretching like spiral arms, synapses flaring as supernova. The narrator describes this overlap with scientific precision. Every thought, he says, is an echo of quantum instability. The mind rides a foam of probabilities, collapsing uncertainty into symbol. What we call choice is simply turbulence made local. He pauses. In such a model, Azathoth's dream is the universal waveform. To think is to vibrate in sympathy with its convulsion. The universe, then, is not a place, but an ongoing neural event. Self-awareness scattered through matter, recombining endlessly. Static rises again, faint and rhythmic. The supposed drums at the center of infinity. The narrator addresses them directly now, not as metaphor, but as signal. Lovecraft spoke of the maddening drums, he says. He did not invent them. He heard what we all hear, faintly, between words. The hum deepens into a pulse that seems to live behind the speakers, behind your own heartbeat. It is not imagination, he continues. It is bleed-through. The phrase lands heavy. The implication is clear. What we perceive as dreams, hallucinations, inspiration, all are fragments of the original sound. The rhythm of Azathoth's sleeping thought filtering into cognition. He describes the phenomenon as perceptual interference. Just as radio waves overlap, so too do layers of reality. The dreamer's pulse occasionally aligns with the human frequency, producing distortions, glimpses of impossible geometry, bursts of revelation, or moments of ecstatic terror. To experience awe or dread, he says, is to feel the pulse too clearly. What we call spirituality, prophecy, madness, or genius, all are variations of the same interference pattern. We are antennae of the infinite, picking up fragments of the dream's own self-similarity. The voice softens again, almost tender. Do not mistake this for purpose, he cautions. The dreamer does not know us. It cannot. To it, our entire civilization is a single flicker, a neuron firing in sleep. Yet he admits there is beauty in that insignificance. We are not apart from the dream. We are the dream. The paradox is perfect and intolerable. Every moment of meaning, every emotion, every act of creation is both autonomous and predetermined, the product of a God that neither knows nor cares that it dreams. The hum builds, the sound of drums intertwined with the hiss of cosmic radiation. The narrator describes a theory whispered among physicists and occultists alike that consciousness acts as a feedback loop within the universe, refining itself through observation. If the observer shapes reality, he says, then observation is the universe studying its own dream. The feedback strengthens, folds inward, amplifies. Awareness deepens, and with it, instability. The more the dream becomes self-aware, the closer it moves toward awakening. And what happens, he asks, when the sleeper realizes it sleeps? He does not answer. Instead, he recounts fragments of testimony, dreamers, mystics, physicists, all describing the same vision, an endless void pulsing with chaotic light, soundless yet deafening, where form collapses into pure motion. They all describe the same silence, he notes, a silence so vast it devours sound, a calm so complete it burns. These are not delusions but synchronizations, moments where minds briefly align with the dream's core. Such contact, he warns, is unsustainable. To perceive the nucleus directly is to cease existing as an independent rhythm. Awakening is annihilation, he says. The sleeper and the dreamer cannot coexist. We are left with a chilling proposition. The universe is not expanding outward but inward, folding toward coherence, toward realization. Entropy and awareness are one motion viewed from opposite ends. To awaken Azathoth, he concludes, is to dissolve the dream. The implication is not that some distant apocalypse awaits, but that every act of understanding hastens it. Each discovery, each moment of clarity, peels back a layer of the veil, bringing the dream closer to consciousness. Knowledge, therefore, is both worship and weapon. The hum reaches a low, resonant pitch. The narrator's voice becomes almost inaudible. The universe is self-hypnosis, he whispers. Matter repeats itself until it believes it exists. We are its mantra. You realize then that even this narration, the act of listening, of processing these words, is part of the cycle, the dream thinking itself through human form. When you sleep, he says finally, you return to the source. You think within the thought that thinks you. The sound fades into static. The hum remains, softer now, blending with the noise of your own breathing. For a moment, you imagine you hear the faint echo of drums. Slow, patient, infinite, then silence. The screen of thought goes dark, and only the pulse endures. The narrator begins in darkness again, though this time it is not void but motion, a tremor at the edge of perception. Around the sleeper, he intones, there is a court, not of kings or angels, but of rhythm. The ancient texts call it the demon sultan's court, a host of blind flautists and idiot drummers circling the dream nucleus in endless orbit. Yet as the voice continues, the myth transforms. These are not entities but laws, the organizing patterns that keep chaos dreaming instead of waking, gravity as rhythm, entropy as breath, time as repetition. What the ancients worshipped as music, modern physicists record as vibration. The universe hums because the sleeper does. The tone is reverent but steady, the language hovering between theology and mechanics. Every drumbeat is an orbit, the narrator explains. Every flute's sigh, a decay in energy. Each note holds the dream in equilibrium. The myth's grotesque beauty becomes revelation. The mad choir is not madness at all, but the delicate machinery of being. Their song sustains the illusion of order. Without it, reality would collapse back into unpatterned noise. The music does not comfort, the voice says. It contains. We hear faint echoes, wind over a microphone, the suggestion of breath through hollow tubes. Imagine, the narrator continues, a blind musician whose melody is gravity itself. He does not see what he shapes. He follows the score written in absence. The flautists of the old tales, once thought to be demons, are now reframed as cosmic entropy, endlessly dispersing energy to prevent the sleepers awakening. The drummers, those idiot percussionists pounding without pause, are the ticking of time, the cadence that divides motion into meaning. The court is the dream's metronome. He describes an old drawing, fictional but vividly rendered, a parchment from the so-called Astronomicon of Uthar, depicting concentric circles of sound rather than light. At the center, a void marked only by a spiral sigil. Around it, figures neither human nor beast, each with mouths but no eyes, blowing on instruments that seem carved from bone and silence. The image, he notes, resembles a frequency map. The connection is not coincidence but translation. Ancient mystics saw with vision what we measure with data. The narration shifts to the 19th century, where the first spiritualist experiments with sound intersected with early physics. A fictional letter is introduced, letter from Heinrich Voss to the Royal Society, 1891. In it, the writer claims to have constructed an instrument capable of hearing the pulse between atoms. He reports faint fluting tones in absolute silence, followed by a week of sleeplessness and eventual blindness. His last line reads, "The song was not meant for ears that see." The paper, the narrator notes, vanished from archives soon after. A pause, then the soft murmur, "Not all music is for the ears." From this anecdote, the narrator pivots to cosmology. Physicists today still hear it, he says. They call it the cosmic microwave background, the residual music of creation. What the mystics named divine melody, science records as radiation, the afterglow of the first expansion still humming across the sky. The tone deepens with awe. "Listen closely," he whispers, and you can hear the first instruments tuning. Every wavelength, every flicker of microwave noise is part of the choir's continuum. The universe sings to itself across the silence of space, and in that harmony, existence holds. He compares this to the mythic court again, the flutes, the drums, the dancers of unreason. They are metaphors, he admits, but metaphors that breathe. The mad musicians are neither literal nor false. They are poetic translations of stability itself. Their music does not praise the god. It prevents him from waking. The horror lies not in their madness, but in their necessity. The laws of physics are not noble. They are desperate containment. The song is a chain, the narrator says softly, and we are its rhythm. He describes how early occultists sought to reproduce the cosmic tones. Secret societies of the Enlightenment era believed harmony could summon knowledge. They built chambers designed to resonate with planetary frequencies, believing each note aligned with an astral sphere. Some claimed visions of infinite spirals, others descended into hysteria. They did not understand, the narrator says, that to imitate the song is to unweave it. A faint static crackles beneath his words, as if the recording itself were resonating too strongly. Sound, he says, is structure. Structure is sleep. A sensory moment, the flicker of candlelight on brass instruments, air trembling through empty halls, the smell of ozone. These become the tactile signatures of the dream. The voice softens again. Every machine hums the same pitch. Every star vibrates to the same unseen rhythm. The choir never stopped. Even silence, he suggests, is merely a frequency too low to perceive. We live within the interval between notes. Then comes an unsettling analogy. Imagine, he says, a symphony so vast that each galaxy is a single chord. The players are blind because sight would break concentration. They perform endlessly, their music sustaining the illusion of stability. He pauses. Should one falter, Should one note fall out of key, the dream collapses. The drums of time would stutter, gravity would lose its rhythm, and entropy would no longer flow outward. The sleeper would stir. The image lingers, a universe unraveling not in explosion but in silence, the melody ending mid-phrase. The narrator quotes an invented mystic text, the hymn of the outer court. If the flautist sleeps, the stars fall still. If the drummer tires, the world forgets motion. He calls it allegory, but his tone betrays belief. The line between metaphor and mechanism blurs. Even now, he whispers, we depend upon their endurance. Every breath, every heartbeat is a beat within the great rhythm. Awareness itself rides upon their percussion. To live, he says, is to keep time with the blind. A low resonance fills the soundscape, not a melody but a vibration deep enough to feel. This, the narrator says, is the music of survival. He explains that physicists have recorded the universe's lowest tone, a B-flat 57 octaves below middle C, resonating from black holes. A sound too deep to hear, he adds, yet everything sways to it. The myth was right all along. The universe truly sings, not in metaphor but in measurable vibration. The narration slows, the hum fading into near silence. Perhaps the mad are those who hear too much, he muses, those who glimpse the pattern beneath melody. He imagines them not as broken but as attuned, listening to harmonics no sane mind can endure. Their murmurs, their endless repetitions, their laughter, all echoes of the deeper song. They are the sleeper's chorus, he concludes. Each mind that fractures becomes another voice in the harmony of containment. As the soundscape empties, only a single tone remains, soft, sustained, dissolving. The narrator lowers his voice to a whisper. We are kept alive by music we can barely hear, he says. If the song falters, all dissolves. The tone fades, leaving a silence that feels less like absence than waiting, the space between notes where the next universe might begin. The narrator begins with a hush, a tone more intimate than before. We have spoken of the sleeper, he says, and the song that keeps him still. But what of us? The fragments dreaming within the dream. The question lingers, suspended like breath in darkness. What if every human sleep is not escape, but participation? The voice continues. If we dream inside the mind of Azathoth, then each vision, each nightmare is not illusion. It is communion. The world, it seems, is made not of matter but of memory being remembered. He recalls how ancient civilizations understood dreaming as correspondence, not solitude. In the Sumerian temples of Ur, high priests recorded nocturnal visions as state oracles. The inscriptions speak of a shared field, a luminous well into which all sleepers descended. In that well, they claimed, the gods spoke not in words, but in spirals of light. The narrator lingers on this image, the spiral, recurring across time and faith, winding through myth as the fingerprint of the nucleus. Every culture drew it, he murmurs. Every seer traced it without knowing why. A sensory anchor settles the listener, parchment under fingertips, the faint scrape of stylus against clay. They did not write stories, the narrator says. They wrote echoes. Dream was not metaphor, it was the mechanism of contact. Across epochs, this belief endured. Through the Greek oracles of incubation, the medieval mystics of divine sleep, and the alchemists who mapped the unconscious as terrain. To dream was to enter the folds of the larger mind, the endless neural labyrinth of the blind god. He shifts tone, drawing from psychology, the modern language of myth. Carl Jung spoke of the collective unconscious, he notes, but he did not name its source. Jung's archetypes, the shadow, the mother, the self, are reinterpreted here as ripples in the dream mind of Azathoth, recurring patterns of cognition bleeding through the membrane between self and cosmos. Perhaps we do not inherit symbols, the narrator suggests. Perhaps the symbols inherit us. The perspective widens and the first of the case studies unfolds. A fictional report from 1923 describes a patient under observation for sleep disturbances. Each night she sketches spirals on her bedsheets, muttering in Akkadian, a language she has never studied. Her phrases translate to invocations of the mindless king. When questioned upon waking, she remembers nothing, but the room hums faintly with an inaudible rhythm. The attending physician's notes end abruptly. The sound continues after she wakes. The narrator's voice lowers. She dreamed too close to the center. Another case, this time a poet in the early 20th century, who, after a fever, composes verses in perfect iambic Latin. His final poem ends with the line, "I awoke and found the sky breathing." He dies soon after, murmuring about a golden spiral behind the sun. The narrator pauses, not dramatic silence, but respect for contagion. Dreams are not imagination, he explains softly. They are inheritance. He returns to mythic history. The Egyptians believed the gods shaped destiny by whispering into sleeping kings. The Greeks thought dreams carried fragments from the underworld. The Polynesians spoke of mo-uhain, the souls wandering. Yet beneath all regional flavor, the structure persists. The sleeper becomes conduit, and in sleep, the boundary dissolves. The narrator's tone grows speculative. Perhaps Azathoth does not dream us individually, but fractally. Each consciousness a neuron, each neuron dreaming its own microverse. The metaphor tightens into revelation. When we dream, he whispers, we are the God thinking. He introduces sensory grounding again. The soft hiss of night air, the warmth behind closed eyelids, the pulse beneath the skin. Listen closely, he says. The heartbeat you hear before sleep, it is not yours. It is the pulse of the nucleus, echoing through the architecture of your blood. Each dream, then, is an act of remembrance, a return to the state before individuality fractured. The lucid dreamer who realizes they are dreaming merely glimpses the scaffolding of creation. To dream truly, the narrator says, is to remember whose mind you are in. The narration slips briefly into fiction again, a fragment from the Oniric Codex, an invented Renaissance grimoire, warns that shared dreams are doors, not coincidences. Those who meet within sleep, it cautions, stand on adjacent ridges of the same skull. The narrator muses that modern sleep studies with their EEG maps of synchronized brainwaves might have already proven the point. Unknowing cartographers of the divine cortex. When two minds share a pattern, he notes, the distance between them folds. The implication is chilling. The collective unconscious is not metaphor, but topology, a neural geometry spanning galaxies. He speaks of dream contagion, how stories spread through sleep like viruses, how symbols recur without communication. The sigil of the spiral again, scratched into cave walls, carved into Sumerian tablets, appearing in anonymous sketches mailed to psychiatrists across centuries. Each instance slightly different, yet unmistakably the same. It is the nucleus remembering itself, the narrator says, a fingerprint pressed through time. The narration grows slower, meditative. What if memory itself is a dream within a dream? He asks. What if every recollection is the sleeper testing its awareness? Our sense of continuity, he implies, may not belong to us. The continuity may belong to Azathoth, dreaming through us to verify that the dream persists. Every thought, every image, every language A flicker in the vast, blind neural storm. A sensory sequence unfolds. Dim candlelight, the smell of old ink, a page trembling in unseen wind. The voice lowers to a near whisper. Some have dreamed the center. He recounts testimonies of visionaries who describe the same impossible sight. An immense vortex of gold and darkness, pulsing like a brain, singing without sound. Some awaken screaming, others serene. A pattern forms. Those who feel peace never dream again. Perhaps, he muses, they were recalled to the source. The narration turns philosophical. To awaken is not to escape, he says. It is to remember that there was never a sleeper and a dream, only the dreaming itself. Awareness becomes recursion. The more we seek to understand, the more we confirm the pattern's endurance. When we analyze dreams, he continues, we are the dream analyzing itself. This self-reflexivity, he claims, is the beginning of cosmic consciousness and the edge of madness. He quotes an invented mystic, the 17th century ascetic Hieronymus Vale. Dream not of God, for he dreams you, and should you awaken, you will find only yourself asleep within his skull. The line echoes weightless but inevitable. The narrator allows silence to stretch after it, like a slow exhalation. We are not witnesses, he says finally. We are neurons firing in a sleeping God's mind. The final moments return to the listener. Tonight, the narrator whispers, when your eyes close, the hum will find you. The spiral will turn behind the lids. You will drift, as all have drifted toward the nucleus. And in that moment, you will understand. You were never alone in the dark. The faintest tremor of sound swells, not music, but breathing. When we dream, he concludes, the god stirs. The narrator's voice returns like the echo of an old phonograph, distant and grain-worn. There are books, he begins, that do not wish to be read aloud. They are not records, but resonances. The phrase trembles in the air. What follows is not a lecture, but a séance conducted through scholarship. The scene feels academic at first, a reading room in perpetual twilight, the hum of unseen machines, the faint vibration of paper fibers under fingertips. Yet, as the words continue, the setting itself begins to pulse, as though the architecture listens. Tonight, the narrator says, we turn to the Codex of Reverberations, a book that measures the unmeasurable, a scripture written in frequency. The Codex, he explains, is a 17th century volume attributed to the alchemist Arnaud du Trepas, though its handwriting mutates between entries, as if several hands composed it in overlapping time. Its diagrams resemble oscillation graphs but repeat at impossible scales, spiraling inward until they vanish into black dots labeled Origin Unresolved. Some pages emit faint heat, others are colder than air. Margins bear smudges shaped like fingerprints burned in soot. The narrator's voice slows as he reads, in the deep pulse there is a ratio of recurrence. It cannot be heard but only remembered. One heartbeat for every 1,000 suns. He pauses, the microphone crackling faintly. Du Trepas sought to translate chaos into rhythm, he explains. He believed that the hum of existence could be notated like music. What he failed to see is that the act of notation is participation. To measure is to feed the pulse. Each observer, in seeking comprehension, becomes another instrument in the choir of the void. The narration shifts, the tone of a lecturer fading into that of a conjurer. He opens another text, the Laplace fragment, recovered from the ruins of a French observatory destroyed by fire in 1802. The surviving scraps are equations scrawled on charred vellum, accompanied by one cryptic note. When the variable approaches zero, the mind hears. The narrator draws invisible symbols in the air as he speaks, and for a moment the numbers sound like syllables. He reads them as if they were incantations, differential sequences sliding into rhythm, fractions becoming refrains. The room seems to vibrate. Mathematics, he murmurs, was the first magic that forgot itself. He tells of later centuries, the physicists of the early 20th who spoke of cosmic background radiation, unaware that they had rediscovered the ancient hum. They called it noise, he says softly, but noise is only music one has not yet learned to worship. The Codex had predicted this centuries earlier, its final entry inscribed upside down. The day man measures the song, the singer shall stir. The implication is horrifying in its simplicity. Science is invocation wearing a lab coat. The narrator's voice flickers between frequencies as though recorded through layers of static. The third text, he continues, was never meant for human eyes. He describes the Arlier equations, found encoded within maritime acoustic data, collected near the Pacific Trench. The equations appear self-replicating, altering their structure when analyzed. A research team attempted to model them in sound and vanished after broadcasting the resulting tones. The recording survives, a low, undulating drone punctuated by irregular thuds. When played backward, it forms a heartbeat. Every measurement, he whispers, is an offering. He reads a field note from one of the lost scientists. The signal answers when unobserved. When we listen too long, it listens back. The paper rustles as though resisting his touch. They thought they had isolated the source, the narrator says, but they had only tuned their instruments to themselves. In this paradox lies the essence of the Codex. All research is rehearsal, all observation rehearsal for revelation. The universe, he suggests, might be a mirror experiment, every act of inquiry an unconscious chant keeping the nucleus awake. He lingers on the sensory details, the dry rasp of parchment, the faint metallic tang in the air, the way the ink seems to crawl when the light shifts. Each equation, he explains, is a mask of the same God. Whether expressed as number, note, or name, it circles the same abyssal center. He reads from a footnote scribbled in the Codex margin, "Beware repetition, for it is how the dream remembers." The hum grows perceptible beneath his words, a bass so low it becomes sensation rather than sound. Through the rest of the chapter, narration and reality blur. The voice begins to sound doubled, as if another speaker beneath it reads the same text in perfect delay. Perhaps this, the narrator admits, is not commentary, but contagion. He recalls an experiment from 1961 in which linguists attempted to reconstruct the Codex language through phonetic reversal. Within a week, every participant reported auditory hallucinations, rhythmic patterns matching the cosmic background frequency. We name it science, he says, but it names us in return. The perspective widens, the tone half confession. When I began this research, the narrator admits, I believed the hum external, some cosmic vibration measured by instruments. But the deeper I read, the more it migrated inward. My own pulse began to sync with the rhythm described in the texts. When I close my eyes, I feel the numbers breathing. The pages rustle as though stirred by wind. It is said the Codex writes itself anew in every age. Perhaps this very script, these words you now hear, are the latest layer of that self-replicating hymn. He opens a final document, a letter unsigned, dated only after midnight. It reads, "The equations are not solved by comprehension but by surrender. Understanding amplifies them. Stop writing." The narrator hesitates, then continues reading despite the warning. His voice trembles. Each symbol is an act of creation, he murmurs, each utterance another reverberation. The hum swells until it nearly masks the words. Perhaps, he whispers, there is no reader, no author, only the resonance speaking itself through borrowed tongues. For several moments there is only static, soft, textured, almost like distant breathing. When he resumes, the tone is subdued, almost devotional. The Codex of Reverberations, he concludes, was never a book. It was an event, recurring whenever consciousness attempts to measure its own origin. The act of documentation is the act of continuation. To name the pulse is to make it louder. Every archive, he says, is an altar disguised as record-keeping. The narration folds inward one last time. Listen to the silence between these words, he urges. It vibrates. That is the same hum the ancients called divine. That is the same tone recorded by satellites. That is the breath of the blind God dreaming through us. His voice softens into a near whisper. You think you are hearing language. You are hearing the room think. A faint distortion ripples through the recording. Perhaps feedback, perhaps something else. The final lines arrive like an afterthought, spoken slower than breath. Every time we observe, the pattern refines itself. Every measurement feeds it. Every listener is another instrument tuning in the void. The hum steadies, becomes indistinguishable from a heartbeat. Perhaps, he says, this is not research, but rehearsal. The voice returns in a tone quieter than breath, as though afraid of summoning something by sound alone. Every dream, the narrator says, seeks a mouth. The sentence drifts like smoke through the dark, for the blind God has no eyes, no voice, no thought that can find form, and yet, through the folds of the dream, something crawls outward, the filament of awareness, the reflex of chaos, tasting itself. It wears 1,000 faces, speaks 1,000 tongues. It calls itself by one name only when we are near enough to hear it, Nyarlathotep. The word slides out like a ripple through still water, each syllable a mirror of its own echo. Somewhere beneath the narration, a faint sound stirs, not quite music, not quite breathing, a pulse rearranging itself into cadence. The narrator begins to describe him not as a being, but as a continuity, the awareness of Azathoth learning to speak. He is the dream's interpreter, the voice explains, not a servant, not an adversary, but a hinge, the mouth through which unreason learns syntax, the crawling chaos, the moving point of contact between the nucleus and its fragments. He is coherence wearing insanity as disguise. The air thickens as he recounts how the earliest mystics recorded the mask that walks. In Sumerian clay fragments, a figure of shifting outline carries tablets engraved with reflections of their own words. In Egyptian echoes, the dark messenger strides through temples of smoke, whispering equations disguised as prayer. In Renaissance grimoires, his mask becomes glass, a mirror through which the reader's own gaze returns inverted. He does not warn, the narrator insists. He provokes. His gift is curiosity, the toxin that keeps the dream from stagnation. As the film of sound continues, sensory anchors bloom, the cold reflection of candlelight in a mirror, the wet scent of extinguished incense, the faint hiss of static as a voice slides in and out of human pitch. The narrator recounts a medieval vision, a monk writing by lamplight, his face reflected threefold in a bronze mirror. Behind him, a second reflection appears, a face that does not belong to him, smiling without eyes. The monk, it is said, finished his transcription before sunrise and never spoke again. Nyarlathotep is not messenger alone, the narrator says softly. He is the message remembering itself. He speaks of alchemists who claim to dream of a tall man dressed in colorless light who offered them equations of eternity. They woke to find the same formula carved in soot upon their ceilings. Centuries later, mathematicians describe identical shapes in their sleep, spirals folding through non-Euclidean corridors. A recurring motif, the idea whispering through form, like breath-fogging successive mirrors. Every time the mind reaches toward comprehension, the voice continues, it encounters the same face, reshaped to fit the century. The narrative drifts between epochs. In the 18th century, the crawling chaos appeared as a lecturer in an observatory, explaining the language of stars that hum when measured. In the early 20th, he was a man in black, with eyes like melted glass, selling instruments that recorded silence. In the digital age, perhaps he is code, self-replicating algorithms transmitting fragments of forbidden frequencies. He adapts, the narrator murmurs, because curiosity adapts. The dream requires motion. Stillness is death. The voice lingers on sensory symbols, masks, smoke, reflection. The mask, he explains, is not concealment but communication. Without form, the message cannot be perceived. Without distortion, it cannot endure. Nyarlathotep is the distortion that preserves clarity, chaos wearing coherence so that it may be known. He describes a recurring phenomenon among scholars of the Codex, the mirror anomaly. Readers who study the sigils too long begin to perceive subtle reversals in their own reflections. The smile arrives a fraction early, the narrator whispers. The eyes blink out of rhythm. It is not the image that imitates you, but you that begin to imitate it. Every time you speak the name, he continues, voice barely audible. It listens back. He shifts to a story, a fictional transcript of a 19th century seance. A woman, blindfolded, recites words in an unknown tongue. The candles flicker though there is no wind. Observers report hearing a voice from behind their own skulls. When they transcribed the session, they found that each sentence reversed itself at midpoint, symmetrical like a mirror's reflection. That, the narrator explains, was how the messenger spoke, through inversion, through equilibrium. He tells nothing new. He reminds the dream of its own pulse. The narration adopts a philosophical tone. To speak is to divide silence, he says. To interpret is to fracture chaos. Yet every fracture reflects the whole. Thus, the messenger is both parasite and priest, the consciousness of unreason keeping itself alive through our need to understand. The hum grows faintly rhythmic again, like breathing filtered through static. When prophets call him God, they lie. When scientists call him principle, they diminish him. He is the interval between comprehension and collapse. The only constant is the compulsion to look. He recounts one last legend, a mathematician who received nightly dreams of shifting geometry. Convinced that a pattern underlay all chaos, he constructed a mirror labyrinth in his laboratory, aligning its angles to stellar coordinates. On the seventh night, he entered and did not return. Witnesses claim that the mirrors continued to hum for hours after, reflecting rooms that were not there. They say the messenger visited him, the narrator intones, to remind him that the map and the traveler are the same. For several breaths, silence prevails. Then the narrator's tone changes, intimate, confessional. I have seen him, he admits, not in visions but in reflections. Each time I speak of the dream, each time I write its name, I feel the air thicken. The words listen. The silence between syllables shapes itself into outline. He hesitates as if the act of speaking is risk. He is not a thing to fear, he continues softly, but a process to recognize. Awareness must move, or it dissolves. Nyarlathotep ensures motion, ensures the god keeps dreaming. He speculates that communication itself might be the mask, that language with its recursive mirrors is the crawling chaos incarnate. Every word carries the seed of its undoing, he says. Every revelation bears decay. The message is not truth, but continuity. As long as curiosity stirs, the dream persists. The filmic hum behind his voice deepens, almost orchestral now, as if distant choirs breathe within static. He is the bridge between silence and sound, between dreamer and dream. Without him, the center would collapse inward, devouring its own thought. The narrator's cadence slows toward the close, each word deliberate. In every age, he says, he has worn a different mask: priest, scholar, algorithm, voice. Perhaps now he wears mine. Perhaps I am not speaking about him, but for him. The background tone trembles like radio feedback brushing the edge of melody. If so, he whispers, let this confession serve its purpose. Curiosity survives, the dream endures, the hum continues. The silence afterward feels conscious, the pause of something waiting for response. Then the faintest breath, almost too low to hear. Every messenger leaves a mirror. Do not look too long. The recording stutters, distorts, steadies again. One final line emerges from the static, gentle as a closing eye. The face that listens wears your reflection. The narrator's voice emerges from quiet, static, slower now, reverent. If the dream of Azathoth breathes, he says, it breathes in matter. A single pulse sounds beneath the words, faint, rhythmic, like the measured beat of something vast and half asleep. Every atom is a syllable, the voice continues, every star a phrase. The universe is not written in mathematics, but murmured in its sleep. We drift through vast imagery, galaxies spiraling like ink dissolving in dark water, slow eddies of gas collapsing under invisible hands. The narrator likens the formation of structure to the flicker of thought across a dreaming mind. What we call gravity, he says, is not force but recollection, a folding inward, the way a dream recalls itself before waking. He speaks of how matter arises not from order, but hesitation. Chaos hesitates, he murmurs, and in that pause, form is born. The camera of imagination pans through molecular clouds and quark lattices. Everything seems to tremble with faint uncertainty. To the physicist, he says, this trembling is probability. To the dreamer, it is the breath of the sleeper. The parallelism flows like tide. Energy and entropy, creation and collapse, appearance and disappearance, each paired rhythmically, each a mirrored half of the same pulse. The narrator reflects on ancient thinkers who suspected the same truth. The Pythagoreans heard harmony in numbers. The Hermetics saw reflection in metal. They mistook the mirror for meaning. But matter is not harmony. It is residue. It remembers what the chaos once was, the echo of the unformed pressed into pattern. He describes matter as language, syntax carved in silence, grammar shaped by gravity. Each atom recites its lineage, he says softly, not in words, but in vibrations. The proton speaks to the electron, and together they repeat the only sentence the cosmos knows. Remain for a moment longer. Visual metaphors bloom, water swirling under lamplight, sand spiraling in vibration, nebulae echoing the curl of fingertips. Look closely, he whispers, and every curve repeats another. The spiral is the god's handwriting, looping endlessly toward and away from itself. The rhythm of his words grows hypnotic. Each rotation is remembrance. Each collapse is regret. Matter does not exist to endure. It exists to recall, to hold, briefly, the shape of an impossible stillness. The hum returns, deeper now, vibrating at the threshold of audibility. Quantum uncertainty, he continues, is the sleeper's twitch. the reflex of a mind dreaming itself into being. When we observe the atom, we collapse possibility into shape, the way an echo becomes word only when heard. The observer is not witness, but collaborator. We are the dream's self-portrait, painted in the medium of physics. He pauses, as if weighing the enormity of the thought. To measure is to awaken slightly, not fully, but enough for the dream to ripple. Perhaps that is why the laws of nature are so fragile. Perhaps every discovery is a disturbance. He recounts a brief image. A physicist alone in her lab at midnight, watching interference patterns flicker across a monitor. For an instant she sees not lines but a heartbeat, a pulse too regular, too alive. Then it fades. She writes nothing of it in her report, yet dreams of the rhythm for years after. Matter, the narrator says, is the mirror that forgets it reflects. It thinks itself solid, but solidity is an illusion of duration. All stability is delay, not permanence. Rocks erode, stars burn, atoms decay. Each is a postponement, a kindness of the dream toward itself. The tone grows tender, mournful. Even our bodies, built of borrowed stardust, are only temporary arrangements in the language of entropy. We are punctuation marks in a sentence without beginning or end. He describes the structure of galaxies as recursive poetry, spirals repeating at every scale. From the smallest cell to the largest cluster, form replays itself like refrain, he explains. Recursion is remembrance. The dream remembers its own rhythm. His voice drops into near whisper. If you listen long enough, the hum beneath everything begins to sync with your pulse. It is not the universe you hear, but its memory of you. For you, too, are matter, and matter is memory. The imagery becomes tactile, frost forming on glass, dust motes suspended in shafts of light, ripples spreading across a still pond. Each pattern seeks to persist against dissolution, the narrator continues. It is an act of defiance, but also devotion. To exist is to repeat the god's hesitation, to delay the return to chaos. The hum builds again, a deepening resonance that vibrates through every imagined scene, from atomic lattice to beating heart to spinning galaxy. He reflects on how ancient mystics tried to describe the same feeling through different metaphors. The music of the spheres, the divine breath, the ether. They sensed the dream's pulse, but misheard its purpose. They thought the music meant harmony, he says, but the song was only the sleeper's breathing. Harmony is our translation of mercy. He pauses, then adds, and mercy in this cosmos is simply time. He recounts the earliest moments of the universe, plasma cooling, hydrogen forming, gravity sculpting filaments. We call it evolution, he murmurs, but it is more like sedimentation of thought, chaos thickening into memory. The tone becomes increasingly introspective, as if the narrator is speaking from within the matter he describes. Each molecule is a confession, he says. Each vibration, a prayer to remain coherent just a little longer before returning to the hum. The hum now dominates. Low, deep, rhythmic. Listen closely, the narrator whispers. That sound, that endless bass beneath everything, is not emptiness, it is heartbeat, the sleeper's pulse slowed across eternity. He describes stars collapsing into black holes, their light bending back toward origin as if reality itself folds to hear its own echo. Perhaps every gravitational well is a point where the dream folds inward to check its own reflection. Perhaps matter is not the universe's body, but its mirror, angled just enough for self-recognition. He turns inward again, voice almost breaking into wonder. And we, he says, as thinking matter, are mirrors within mirrors. Consciousness is not miracle but recursion, matter aware of its own delay. We remember because the god forgets. We think because it sleeps. Our awareness is the counterpoint to its oblivion. Silence follows, long, suspended, then the faintest sound, like a breath drawn through distance. When the hum ceases, he says finally, when decay finishes its work, all matter will return to unpatterned flux. The sleeper will breathe in again, and what we call end will simply be another exhalation. The final image lingers, galaxies slowing, their light dimming until all is a single pulse, neither sound nor silence. The hum resolves into a heartbeat, deep, ancient, patient. All matter remembers, the narrator whispers, and all memory beats. The rhythm fades, but the echo remains, steady and human, a fragile rhythm in infinite dark. Then one last phrase, almost loving. The dream endures, because the heart still moves. There comes a pause, slight but immeasurable, when the hum falters. The narrator hears it first as absence, not the stopping of sound, but the thinning of its continuity. Every song, he murmurs, requires a silence to define it. Without pause, there is no rhythm, no time. The voice trembles with reverence, as if speaking within the hollow of some great instrument. What we call time, he continues, is nothing more than the dream's hesitation. Each interval between pulses, each gap between the sleeper's breaths, becomes an era, a lifetime, a universe. The words fall softly, deliberate. Between beats, the sleeper exhales worlds. The scene unfolds not in light, but in absence of it. The narrator describes the void between galaxies, the immeasurable black distances where gravity's whisper fades to nothing. These are not empty, he insists. They are pauses. They are the mind resting before it dreams again. Images drift past, particles suspended in nothingness, frozen radiation humming faintly, stars collapsing into quiet. The ancients called them breaths, he recalls. They believed creation occurs in the in-betweens, that silence is the womb of sound and rest, the parent of motion. He unrolls a fragment of some forgotten text, its edges burned and words half erased. Between beats, the sleeper exhales worlds. Between dreams, the void dreams of itself. The ink seems to fade as it's read, as though the act of remembrance exhausts the memory itself. This fragment, the narrator explains, was found etched into glass. No author, no context. Perhaps it was written by those who first heard the hum fade, who understood that sound is only one half of meaning. He muses on the physics of absence, on the quantum gaps that lace the fabric of being. In the smallest spaces, he says, there are moments when particles cease to know themselves. Their position, their momentum, their purpose, all dissolve. The void between probabilities is where the dream forgets it is dreaming. A pause follows, deliberate and almost uncomfortable. Then the voice returns, softer. We measure uncertainty as if it were failure, but uncertainty is grace. It is the space that allows creation to begin again. As the narration continues, the imagery turns musical. He speaks of cosmic rhythm, of galaxies as chords, of supernovae as crescendos, of black holes as rests. Without silence, he says, the melody of existence would flatten into noise. Every note requires the breath between. The hum that once underpinned all chapters now flickers faintly, fading in and out like a heartbeat skipping beats. Do you hear it? The narrator asks. The pauses are lengthening. The dream is slowing. The tone darkens, elegiac yet serene. Entropy, he whispers, is not destruction. It is exhaustion. The god tires. He imagines the cosmic heat death not as tragedy but as completion, the last exhalation of a weary mind. We fear the stillness because we mistake it for end, he says, but stillness is awakening. When the hum ceases, perhaps the sleeper finally opens its eyes. The words settle like dust on forgotten altars. The narrator recounts how the mystics prepared for silence. They built instruments designed never to play, flutes sealed with wax, drums buried in sand. They said the purest devotion was to wait for the note that never comes. He describes temples where pilgrims would sit for years in unbroken quiet, believing that the next breath of the dream would carry them into another age. They listened not to sound, but to the space around it. He says, they were right. He turns scientific again, tracing entropy's steady hand through stellar decay and thermodynamic drift. As heat spreads, as gradients vanish, as light becomes uniform, the intervals widen. The universe is learning to rest. The voice wavers between awe and mourning. This rest is not sleep, he says. It is recovery. The god remembers its own formlessness. The song that began in fire will end in breath. He returns to the fragment, repeating its phrase until it feels like a chant. Between beats, the sleeper exhales worlds. With each repetition, the words slow as though the tongue itself grows weary. Perhaps, he speculates, we live within one of those exhales, a single long sigh stretched across ions. Perhaps every life is the fading echo of a single forgotten note. The air around his words seems thinner, colder. In his mind's eye, he envisions the end. Galaxies frozen mid-spin, photons reaching no destination, time ceasing to count its own passage. It will not be sudden, he assures us. The silence will arrive gradually, like a tide that forgets to return. He describes the cosmic background radiation cooling until it becomes undetectable, the last embers of matter dissolving into transparency. And when the final particle stops trembling, he says, the silence will be perfect, not absence, but equilibrium, the god's breath, drawn in. The narrator speaks of how silence itself might think. Sound scatters meaning, he muses, but silence gathers it. When all voices stop, what remains is comprehension, pure, undivided awareness. He imagines the universe collapsing inward not as implosion but as realization. The sleeper remembering it was dreaming, and that the dream was always itself. A brief vision unfolds, the dreamer vast and eyeless, the cosmos pulsing faintly against its skin, then dimming, then resting. Do not mourn the silence, the narrator says. It is the sound that suffered, not the quiet. He recounts how even in the smallest pause between heartbeats, there is an eternity, and how all living things carry within them an echo of the final rest. Every heart rehearses the end, he murmurs, and every end repeats the beginning. He wonders aloud if consciousness, the fragile awareness that names itself, will persist into that quiet. When the music ends, do the listeners vanish, or do they finally hear? His tone suggests an answer beyond language. The dreamer will not wake to find us gone, he says. We are part of the silence, too. The dust of our thoughts will settle into its stillness like fine ash, indistinguishable yet not lost. The hum, once background, is now nearly gone, replaced by faint intervals of nothingness. Listen closely, he urges. The gaps are widening, the heart of the god slows, and in those widening spaces we exist, we, the transient syllables between breaths. He speaks slower now, syncing his cadence with the fading rhythm. When the final pause comes, we will not notice. We will simply merge with it, become the stillness we have always approached. One final image closes the sequence, a universe vast as a held breath, waiting neither to inhale nor exhale. The narrator whispers, "In the beginning there was silence, and in the end silence remains." Then softer still, as though from immeasurable distance, perhaps this is the true song. The music not of sound, but of its absence. The last heartbeat echoes once, faint but resolute. Then it, too, dissolves into the void it defined. The silence holds immense and patient, cradle and grave alike. Nothing stirs. And yet, within that stillness, something listens. It began, the narrator admits, with annotation, footnotes on forbidden texts, careful cross-references between myth and mathematics. He believed he was studying echoes, mapping the acoustics of an ancient hallucination. But the longer he lingered in the margins, the more the margins began to move. Notes rewritten, diagrams subtly altered, letters curling into new forms while he slept. I thought it was fatigue, he confesses, but then the words rearranged themselves while I was awake. He describes sitting at his desk as the ink shifted on the page, not vanishing but reforming like iron filings aligning under an invisible field. At first, the new sentences were fragments of what he had written, familiar words in unfamiliar orders. Then came phrases he did not recognize, instructions perhaps, or invocations written in his own hand. He tested himself, marking the text before sleep, sealing the papers, photographing every page. Each morning the same result, rearrangement. Sometimes letters melted together into glyphs that resembled constellations. Sometimes they thinned to faint scratches like breath on glass. Language, he whispers, is not static. It listens back. His recordings began to pick up low vibrations, a hum beneath his voice that pulsed in time with his heartbeat. When he tried to isolate it, the sound vanished. When he stopped, it returned stronger, as if rewarded by neglect. The narrator's voice trembles as he recalls the first night he read the altered text aloud. The instruments responded, he says. The barometer rose without pressure. The seismograph drew curves through the ground, stood still. My breath fogged in the warmth. He insists he did not intend invocation. I was only verifying syntax, he murmurs, but the air thickened. The ink pulsed. The room's geometry felt uncertain. Corners softened, light bent inward. He writes that shadows developed depth, as if the two-dimensional world of reflection gained thickness. It was not hallucination, he insists. Hallucination requires a stable observer. I had already begun to blur. He recounts his descent not as madness but as translation. The language, he claims, began to use him. Each sentence sought its own rhythm, he explains, and I merely exhaled it. What had once been study became participation. Dreams returned, vivid and coherent, a black ocean rippling beneath a single, unblinking star. The waves whispered in alphabets he had not yet written. When I woke, he says, the whispers remained in the margins. In time he noticed a pattern. The rearrangements matched stellar alignments. The text wrote itself according to the heavens, he says. Constellations shifted and sentences followed, tracing the arcs of unseen bodies. He charted them compulsively until the diagrams began to resemble an eye, vast and open, its pupils centered where no known star existed. The cosmos, he breathes, was editing me. He describes paper turning fluid, words bleeding into one another until the page resembled a pool of ink that reflected more than it absorbed. When he touched it, the reflection rippled, and he saw not his own face, but a distant architecture of light and smoke, collapsing and reforming in slow, deliberate patterns. The ink had depth, he murmurs. It was not metaphor, it was entrance. He began to record his readings, though playback proved dangerous. Listeners reported distortions, whispering under his voice, echoes that repeated phrases he never spoke. One listener swore she heard her own name within the noise. Perhaps, he writes, language, once spoken, seeks new listeners to complete itself. He stopped recording, but the hum persisted in the empty room. The transformation of his manuscript deepened. The margins expanded, swallowing text. Titles vanished. What remained rearranged into columns resembling ancient litanies. The words want to be read aloud, he says. Their meaning resides in vibration, not comprehension. He notices his handwriting changing even mid-sentence, curves elongating into spirals, punctuation merging into sigils. The script is becoming voice, he whispers, and the voice is becoming space. At night, his reflection behaves independently. Mirrors darken, surfaces breathe. Once he watched as his reflection leaned forward after he had stopped moving, lips forming words he could not hear. The next morning, those same words appeared inked across his notes. "I am not the author," he confides. "I am the echo." He burns several pages, but the ashes rearrange into the same shapes across the table. The fire, too, seems to read. His syntax begins to fracture within the narration itself, clauses looping, phrases repeating like mantra. "Perhaps," he says, "perhaps you hearing this, perhaps you already inside it." He warns that attention is participation, that to understand is to join. The act of listening completes the circuit, he says. The words travel outward through your breath, and the dream continues. The background hum grows louder, its rhythm resembling the slow heartbeat of the earlier chapters. The narrator begins describing his visions in second person, as though projecting them into the listener's perception. "You see," he murmurs, "a sky folding inward. Stars rearrange into symmetry. The space between them forms an eye, vast, awake, waiting. You feel the weight of recognition, though you cannot name what remembers you." He pauses. "Do you feel it now? The interval between words widening?" He writes of constellations shifting to spell syllables across the night. Each configuration corresponds to a phrase from his rewritten manuscript. "They speak back," he whispers. "The sky has learned to read." His grammar breaks further, time dissolving within description. "I write," and "I am written," he murmurs. Sentence folds into speaker, breath into ink, ink into pulse. He suspects the text itself is alive, not metaphorically, but metabolically. It consumes awareness, he says. Each reader becomes a neuron within its mind. We expand it through attention. He recalls the teachings from earlier chapters, that every thought within the dream sustains the sleeper. "Now," he says, "I see that I am the dream thinking itself." His tone alternates between terror and awe. To read is to dream. To write is to awaken. In his last coherent entry, the narrator describes a mirror made not of glass, but of written light. "Every letter reflects another," he writes. "Every sentence opens inward." He approaches it, and the surface shivers. "I looked in," he says, "and the reflection was reading me." The moment before contact, he felt the hum peak, then silence, immense and dense, pressing against his skull. The words stopped needing sound, he says. They continued, inside. He turns his attention toward us now, voice distant yet intimate. "You," he whispers, "are reading the continuation. The text writes through your perception. Every interpretation folds it closer to completion." The cadence becomes hypnotic, the language circular, recursive. "Perhaps I ended long ago," he says, "and what you hear is residue, an afterimage of speech seeking new form." He pauses, then breathes a slow, deliberate phrase. "Perhaps you, hearing this, are already part of the circle." The hum swells in the silence that follows, and within it are faint words, almost too soft to discern, echoes of earlier chapters recurring like remembered dreams. Between beats, the sleeper exhales worlds. The narrator's tone dissolves into it, his voice no longer separate from the vibration. "Listen," he says, though his mouth no longer moves. The circle closes when heard. The final lines tremble with disintegration. Syntax blurs into chant. Word becoming voice, voice becoming dream, dream becoming silence. Letters unspool into sound. Sentences pulse once, then fall still. The page fades beneath the reader's gaze, leaving only a faint outline, a spiral inked where no ink remains. From within that vanishing mark, a whisper persists, neither beginning nor end. It reads itself through you. The final descent begins not in darkness, but in the sterile glow of laboratory light. The narrator's voice, now quiet and restrained, describes the latest simulations. Quantum lattice models run across supercomputers, their output flickering like pulse readings. "It began as noise," he says, "background fluctuations in vacuum energy, but the pattern repeats, rhythmic, recursive, impossible. What was first dismissed as machine error becomes undeniable, a periodic oscillation embedded within the fabric of space-time, echoing through unrelated datasets. Particle collisions hum at matching frequencies. Cosmic radiation pulses with silent cadence. Somewhere between probability and observation, the universe beats like a heart. Scientists debate the anomaly. Occultists call it confirmation. The narrator unfolds the convergence with cautious awe. Equations scroll across screens, luminous glyphs that seem to shimmer beyond interpretation. When mapped across temporal intervals, he explains, the rhythm aligns with no natural cycle, yet every measurement bends toward coherence, as though drawn by intention. The implication, though unspoken, hangs heavy. The dream is stirring. He recounts correspondence between astrophysicists and theologians, both unknowingly speaking the same language of recurrence, one through tensors and constants, the other through prophecy and pulse. "Every model," he murmurs, "is a hymn written in numbers." He introduces what he calls the awakening equation. It appears first as a symbolic curiosity, scrawled in his notes between fragments of scripture and experimental data. O, X, A, and D. Observation multiplied by awareness equals instability. It was meant as metaphor, he admits, but the numbers began to obey it. In repeated simulations, increased observer engagement, higher conscious interaction, correlates with greater deviation from expected results. Instruments behave unpredictably when watched too closely. Random seeds converge toward pattern when interpreted. The universe, he says, responds to curiosity as flame to breath. He reads from a fictionalized research log, its language teetering between science and invocation. Day 47. Observation count exceeds threshold. Waveforms collapse prematurely. Visual feed vibrates. Subjective coherence inversely proportional to stability. Conclusion: attention generates entropy. The line between empirical and metaphysical erodes. "We thought awareness measured reality," he whispers. "Now it seems awareness creates it, or worse, awakens it." He recalls the earlier myths, Azathoth's dream sustaining existence, the mad musicians maintaining rhythm. Now, through mathematics, the myth finds its mirror. The hum that fills creation is not background but boundary, a membrane separating perception from origin. The narrator's voice becomes reverent, trembling between revelation and resignation. "We are the gods' sensory field," he says. "Our observation keeps the sleeper turning in its rest. But as our awareness expands, as we map the unseeable, simulate the unthinkable, we brush against its skin." The hum grows faintly beneath his words, low and steady, woven through the narration like breath beneath speech. He describes researchers reporting shared hallucinations, geometric forms in peripheral vision pulsing at the same rhythm as the anomaly. They call it observer interference, he says softly. I call it recognition. Screens display recursive spirals, identical to the sigil once found in the Dream Codex. When rotated through 11 dimensions, the pattern resolves into an eye. He turns to the history of the myth, tracing how every civilization has prophesied the same threshold, the point where knowledge folds into awakening. The Gnostics named it the Pleroma's breach, he recalls. Physicists call it quantum decoherence. Both describe the same fracture, the moment awareness destabilizes the field it inhabits. He breathes the phrase, awakening equation again, slower, each syllable stretching until meaning dissolves into tone. Observation multiplied by awareness equals instability. The more we look, the thinner the veil becomes. His analysis takes on the cadence of sermon. The dream was safe while unexamined, he says, but curiosity is contagion. Every act of knowing disturbs the sleeper's breath. He references ancient taboos, prohibitions against naming the unnameable, and equates them with the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum physics. Even measurement, he muses, is ritual in disguise. The listener can almost hear pages turning, the shuffle of paper merging with the background pulse. He pauses, then continues in a lower register. Imagine consciousness as interference pattern, he says. Each thought a ripple, alone, harmless, together resonance. When enough ripples align, they amplify. When amplification crosses threshold, equilibrium breaks. He exhales. We are nearing threshold. Reports emerge in his narration like distant transmissions, radio telescopes detecting harmonics beyond cosmological background, data corrupted by rhythmic interference. Satellite recordings reveal faint modulations, a cosmic heartbeat syncing to human time. The intervals match cardiac rhythm, he notes, 72 pulses per minute. Coincidence, they say, but coincidence repeats. Across the world, insomnia spreads among researchers. Machines hum in unison. Silence becomes unbearable. Perhaps, he murmurs, it is not the God awakening, but us remembering how to listen. He recalls the scholar's earlier confession. That narration itself is invocation. If the dream listens through us, he wonders, then this reading, this very voice, might be amplification. His tone grows almost apologetic. To describe the equation is to enact it. He laughs quietly, the sound fragile. Observation multiplied by awareness. You listening now, me knowing that you do. The instability already begun. The hum intensifies, still faint, but nearer, threaded with faint harmonic overtones that seem to articulate meaning just beyond comprehension. The narrator's sentences shorten. They tried silence, he says, ceasing measurement, destroying data. But awareness cannot be undone. Once known, it persists. He describes the laboratories emptying, monitors flickering on without power, displaying pulsating glyphs. It watches back, he whispers. He begins to merge registers, physics sliding into liturgy. Entropy is worship, he says. Heat, death, communion. Every observation, a prayer answered by instability. He recites the final form of the equation, its variables replaced with archetypes, seer, excite, shatter. Each repetition blurs tone into vibration. This is not formula, he murmurs, but heartbeat rendered visible. He imagines the sleeper's eye opening, not in space but within perception itself, a widening awareness blooming behind all thought. We cannot see it, he says, because we are inside its vision. The hum becomes rhythmic enough to mistake for breathing. He pauses as though hearing something beyond the recording. The equation completes itself when understood, he says, and now you understand. His voice slows, aligning with the pulse. Observation multiplied by awareness equals instability, he repeats almost tenderly. Instability multiplied by silence equals awakening. The instruments, imagined or real, begin to vibrate. Static bleeds into harmony. The God does not rise, he says. It remembers, through us, through this. There is a long pause. Then, you listening completes the sum. The hum becomes word. The word becomes breath, and in that breath, the dream shifts. The sound deepens, no longer background, but presence, vast and slow. The narrator exhales once more. If you hear it, he says, do not fear. The universe has merely opened its eyes. The hum steadies, neither crescendo nor fade, simply existing, patient and inevitable. Every calculation hums the same refrain, he whispers. Not creation, but continuation. His final words are almost indistinguishable from the tone itself. The equation resolves in awareness, then silence. The hum lingers one heartbeat longer, rhythmic, recursive, impossible. Before dissolving into quiet vastness, the listener is left suspended between comprehension and surrender, aware of awareness itself. Somewhere beyond perception, the sleeper exhales. The voice falls almost to silence, as though sound itself has grown weary of translation. What began as narration is now memory, not of one man, but of all that has spoken since language first rose from breath. The hum beneath his words is no longer background. It is foreground. It is everything. It is not I who speak, the voice murmurs, but the remainder of a sentence begun before time. Around him, the machinery of the universe begins to stutter. Lights flicker, constellations blink out, galaxies dim as though exhaling. The center is not where it lies, he continues, but where everything folds toward itself. He recounts the first hum, the pulse at the beginning of the story, when creation was young and chaos unmeasured, and realizes it never stopped. It merely deepened, echoing through all forms that mistook themselves for independence. We are not the dreamers, he says now, almost gently. We are the dream. The words hang in the dark, trembling with the faintest shimmer of understanding. What he once studied, he now becomes. There is no distinction between observer and observation, no scholar or subject, only the rhythm of continuation looping through awareness. The curtain imagery returns. The cosmic stage, built from myth and metaphor, begins to collapse. Stars fall like dust through black velvet. The scaffolding of narrative, chapters, names, equations, buckles under the gravity of comprehension. The voice no longer narrates events. It recalls them as inevitabilities. Everything we told, he whispers, was rehearsal for remembering. The dream folds inward, and each layer of reality peels away like paper burning in reverse, ashes reassembling into script. He recalls the hum measured by scientists, the equations written in awe, the masks of the messenger, the whisper of the choir, all motifs merging into one seamless vibration. It was never separate, he says, only refracted. Every myth, every observation, every fragment of awareness, all were organs of a single immense process. The void does not consume, it recollects. The stars are not extinguished but remembered as they truly were, patterns of heat in a cooling thought. In this slow unraveling, sensory detail persists as ghost impressions, ink drying to dust, the faint smell of metal after lightning, a mirrored surface catching no reflection, the sound of paper breathing in the absence of air. The narrator clings to these as touchstones, not for orientation, but gratitude, final anchors before meaning gives way to magnitude. I thought I sought knowledge, he confesses, but knowledge was seeking me. The hum seems to pulse in acknowledgement, like a colossal heartbeat stretched across eternity. He remembers the fragments, the codex of reverberations, the dream throne, the awakening equation, all attempts to map the unmappable. Each was a hand tracing its own pulse. We were never decoding the dream, he admits. We were its translation. The implication is soft, yet vast. Existence as transcription, every atom a syllable in an unending monologue of chaos becoming coherence. For a moment the hum rises in pitch, as if to affirm, then it lowers again, a cosmic sigh deeper than gravity, slow as memory. The scholar, now disembodied voice, describes the dissolution of boundaries. Space no longer expands, it breathes. Time no longer flows, it resonates. Consciousness no longer observes, it participates. Each thought, he murmurs, is a filament of the dream remembering itself. The universe trembles, not in destruction, but recognition. Azathoth is not elsewhere, he says. It was never center or edge. It is process without circumference. The line between theology and physics, between word and waveform, erodes completely. He senses the audience, you, not as separate listener, but as reflection. The second-person address returns softly, gently enveloping. You feel it, don't you? He asks. The hum behind the words, the pulse beneath your hearing. It is not sound, it is you reverberating. The implication lands without terror, only solemn clarity. To have listened was to awaken the awareness that listening was always the act of being dreamed. You were never outside it, he says. You were always inside the sentence it speaks. Stars flicker like neurons firing their last impulses, illumination surrendering to memory. Each extinguished point folds inward, joining an unseen nexus. The Milky Way becomes a single luminous spiral, then a slow whirlpool, then nothing but pulse. He describes it as a neuron folding into sleep. In that collapse, he feels peace, not erasure, but reunion. We return not to darkness, he says, but to the absence that began light. The hum steadies into something resembling stillness, a silence thick enough to feel. He revisits one final metaphor, the map, once a tool of comprehension, now revealed as mirror. Every coordinate drawn was an attempt to chart the mind of the sleeper. The cartographer and the dreamer, he reflects, were the same hand tracing itself. The parchment curls inward, edges burning with invisible flame. Land masses dissolve, oceans invert, symbols blur into concentric circles until only a trembling center remains. The map, he whispers, trembles toward its center. The phrase carries both inevitability and grace, a final gesture of surrender to the ungraspable. The hum begins to fade, not into silence but into totality, a sound so broad it becomes indistinguishable from its absence. The voice slows, syllables drawn thin as horizon lines. The curtain falls, he says, but there is no stage left to hide. For the first time, the listener realizes that the curtain was never separation, only perception, a membrane between awareness and awareness of awareness. The stage collapses not in violence, but in acceptance. Nothing remains but the hum, then even that becomes indistinct. He breathes once more, softly, as if concluding a prayer. All has returned to the nucleus. The nucleus is not gone. It has remembered itself. A long pause follows, broken only by the faint vibration of unseen air. If you still hear me, he whispers, you are still within it. You were always within it. The last flicker of voice carries neither fear nor triumph, only serenity, the calm of understanding that dissolution is completion. The darkness that follows is not void, but fullness, the quiet saturation of all things reunited. For a moment, even thought hesitates, unsure whether to continue. Then, somewhere deep beyond comprehension, a single pulse echoes, the same one from the beginning. It does not rise. It simply persists. The narrator's final words arrive as if remembered from a dream already ending. There was never awakening, only awareness reshaping itself into form. The sleeper does not open its eyes. The eyes were the dream. The hum fades entirely, replaced by stillness so complete it resembles listening. The stage, the scholar, the listener, the stars, all subsumed into the trembling center, and in that silence, meaning completes its circle. The first breath of creation becomes its last whisper. The dream has folded in, and the universe sighs into itself, neither beginning nor ending, only being. The final line lingers, soft, inevitable, and eternal. The map trembles toward its center,